What is Mimikyu? This is a question that a lot of people have been asking because ever since Pokemon Sun and Moon came out, we've been exposed to the mysteries of the Alola region, and you soon discover that Mimikyu is not as it seems. At first glance, you might think, oh, this twisted Pikachu-looking thing is Mimikyu, but that's actually not the case. That's this little shadow part underneath this Pikachu costume that actually makes up Mimikyu, and then you can look at the official art and see that a little better, that it has this shadow claw that goes out and attacks things, and really, it's just a disguise. It's this Pikachu-looking cloth, effectively, that can be abandoned or discarded or repaired and used as Mimikyu needs, which is actually kind of really interesting when you break it down because it almost feels like the costume is as much Mimikyu as the shadow that actually is Mimikyu, especially when we go and read in the Pokedex entries. After going through all the effort to disguise itself, its neck was broken. Whatever's inside is probably unharmed, but it's still feeling sad. This is actually really strange because it talks about the shadow, this amorphous thing that is Mimikyu, being unharmed and sad, but also its neck being broken. How is this thing's neck able to be broken when it's really just talking about the disguise being broken? So that's a really interesting thing right there. And even when we look at animations, that it almost looks like the disguise looks around, it looks up, it has animations. Even in the anime, it pans to the face of the disguise instead of Mimikyu itself. So it feels like the disguise is as much Mimikyu as it is Mimikyu, as strange as that sounds. And then when we look at the description for Mimikyu, it lives its life completely covered by its cloth and is always hidden. That this is intrinsically a part of Mimikyu, therefore we can still kind of classify it as Mimikyu, even though the true amorphous little shadow thing that actually is Mimikyu is inside. So now that we've kind of looked into what Mimikyu is, now let's go and look at what it is, as in its identity. What is behind the mask? What is behind the disguise? What is Mimikyu actually supposed to be? Well, before we go any further, let's go and look at the anime, because the anime gets pretty dark when it comes to Mimikyu. As you've probably seen by now, Mimikyu isn't dressed as Pikachu just for fun. It seems to be the thing that Mimikyu hates most. That even looking at the description, it's like, oh, 20 years ago, Pikachu started becoming a popular thing, therefore Mimikyu wanted to emulate Pikachu so it wouldn't be as lonely and people would love it. Well, it's not because it wants to be Pikachu or wants to be loved like Pikachu, it hates Pikachu, so it actually becomes what it hates the most. And that can maybe give us a clue to what Mimikyu's identity really is. Also, it hates Pikachu so much that it can't even control itself. At the sight of Pikachu, it will immediately lash out and begin to attack. You can even see like the little glowy eyes from behind the Pikachu costume as it goes and strikes with a Shadow Claw or whatever attack it wants to. Mimikyu just hates Pikachu that much. And this is where the Porygon theory comes into play. So we've kind of established what Mimikyu is trying to be and what could potentially be inside the Mimikyu costume. And it's not Porygon, so let's go and see where the Porygon theory began and then all the other evidence behind it, so that way we can go and thoroughly debunk this. So what happened was there was a Japanese Twitter post that pretty much took it to the next level, describing all of the similarities between Porygon and why Porygon would have a reason to hate Pikachu so much. Now, why would Porygon have reason to hate Pikachu? Well, it all goes back to the banned episode that gave a lot of kids seizures way back in the early days of Pokemon. That what happened was Pikachu was the one that exploded the rockets that created the flashing lights that sent kids into seizures. That Porygon is the one that is blamed for this tragic event of giving kids a lot of seizures, even though it's Pikachu the one that caused it. So it gives reason for Porygon to resent Pikachu, and this is because 20 years ago is when the episode aired. So let's go and look at some of these other things that might go and link Porygon with Pikachu or Mimikyu or something like that. So in Mimikyu's little back room, there's actually a picture of Ash and Pikachu, thus kind of tying in the anime and the games together, but also it would kind of give reason, like, you know, Porygon's just going and being a stalker, like, oh, there's the Pikachu that sent me away, and, you know, building up all of this hatred and just kind of having it in its little den to kind of fester that hatred with and then build up to be stronger and better than Pikachu ever was. That just kind of shows, like, it makes this costume, it goes through all of this work even though it hates Pikachu more than anything. However, there's other pictures of Pikachu, that it's not just this one little picture of Ash and Pikachu and that's where it's happened. Pretty much whatever the intentions behind Mimikyu are, it has a lot of reference pictures. That's all that these really are. That doesn't praise Pikachu, it doesn't care about Pikachu, it just has all these things, and there's different angles, you know, there's pictures of just zoomed in Pikachu's tail or Pikachu from every angle. That way it's able to build up the perfect image of the perfect Pikachu costume, therefore can be loved just like Pikachu. So there's nothing really significant about this picture of Ash and Pikachu. It seems more like a cool nod to the anime than actually a reason behind Mimikyu's intent. Well, let's go deeper because Mimikyu gets a high amount of normal type moves. It also ties into 20 years ago when the episode caused Porygon to be banned, and also the only place in Pokemon Sun and Moon where you receive a Porygon, there's a Mimikyu in the room. So let's go and talk about all of these. Well, the normal moves doesn't really make a lot of sense. Just because Mimikyu has some normal moves doesn't mean it's based off of Porygon, a normal type Pokemon. Actually, it gets Scratch and Slash. Porygon never got access to these moves, and there's nothing really giving away Porygon's identity like Sharpen or anything like that. Maybe even Conversion would be something interesting. But what we also see are a lot of status moves. Now, status moves are mostly going to be normal type moves because they're ambiguous. They just kind of boost stats or do whatever little status thing they do. Therefore, it's a normal typing. It's not that a normal type status move is primarily going to be on normal Pokemon. It's just that all kinds of status moves are just going to be normal typing. So when we see something like Mimic, that works with Mimikyu's identity. Copycat, that works with the identity. They just happen to be normal types. And there's really no correlation here between Porygon and Mimikyu because of that. And then we also have the blurb, around 20 years ago, well, that's when the infamous Pokemon episode was broadcasted on Japanese television, and that's when we had Porygon being banned. You know what else happened 20 years ago? Pokemon being introduced, that we are part of the 20th anniversary of Pokemon. So Mimikyu is more of a callback to the mascot of Pokemon for the 20th anniversary of Pokemon. That I think that outshines this insignificant anime episode that just kind of got brushed away because it gave kids seizures. And then there's the Mimikyu inside of the Aether House. Now, my biggest problem with this is that this is not the only place where you can find a Mimikyu. A little girl has one in a Pokemon Center, and also when you think about encountering wild Mimikyus, there's SOS battles, so there's tons of Mimikyu running around. Just happens that one is inside of there. And when you think about it, there's also the Pokedex entry about Porygon having code that is specifically designed to make it to where Porygon cannot duplicate itself. That means there would have had to be tons and tons of Porygon to have a lot of them die to possess to become Mimikyu. It just starts seeming stranger and stranger. And another thing that I think really starts putting nails in the coffin is that Mimikyu is a ghost type Pokemon. Porygon can never be a ghost type Pokemon, and we can really see that when we start breaking down like the Pokedex entries for Porygon as well. That's a man-made Pokemon that came about as a result of research. It's programmed with only basic emotions. It consists entirely of code, and it can bounce in between cyberspace and stuff. How can a computer, how can something that is man-made become a ghost? There is no spirit for it to die off. I'm not even sure if Porygon can even die. Like, that's the thing here. Mimikyu is a ghost type Pokemon. That means something has to die to possess something else, or at least all the anger, this emotion of hatred towards Pikachu is manifested into some kind of shape or some kind of shadow, and then it creates the Mimikyu disguise because of it. There's nothing for Porygon to die and then manifest itself into. But what about the Pokedex entry in Pokemon Sun and Moon? Let's take a more recent Pokedex entry. Roughly 20 years ago, it was artificially created using the latest technology of the time. But wait, 20 years ago, that's what everyone else is talking about. That 20 years ago is when Porygon vanished and when there would be some kind of manifested hatred right there. Does that mean everything about my theory goes out the window? Because all these 20s are lining up. And that just makes a lot of sense. Also, when we look at Mimikyu, Mimikyu's little blurb right here, you know, the rising popularity of Pikachu style merchandise around 20 years ago is the reason that Mimikyu makes itself look like Pikachu. I guess that must be it. That it has to be Porygon is Mimikyu. There's no real debunking this, except when you actually look at the Pokemon universe. That this is actually the final nail in the coffin for Porygon, because Porygon can only be at max 20 years old. Even in Pokemon terms, we have to remember that the Pokemon world is something that has existed like our world. There is history behind it. There is ancient cultures, there's ancient cities, there's thousands and thousands of years of history, of human history, of Pokemon history that has been recorded, and we can go and look at other Pokedex entries like Claydol. This mysterious Pokemon started life as ancient clay figure made over 20,000 years ago. Pokemon are at least 20,000 years old, and even older, even going back to the mythology with Arceus and other legendary Pokemon. We also see Pokemon like Sigilif that were made to protect cities thousands and thousands of years ago, and we even get a glimpse of the past in Pokemon Forever with Sammy Oak. Now here's the crazy thing, that the anime, the movies, and the games, they're all canon. They all follow roughly the same kind of ideas and stories and rules. Now let's go back to Pokemon the movie 2000. Well, this was the only time Ash had seen Lugia until he sees it in the Whirl Islands. Now in the Whirl Islands with the baby Lugia, Ash actually makes a comment saying, hey, we saw one back in the Orange Islands, thus kind of showing that he remembers the events of Pokemon 2000 even in the main series for the anime. And then we just saw earlier on this video, there's a picture of Ash and Pikachu inside Pokemon Sun and Moon, inside Mimikyu's little back room hidey area. So it kind of shows that there is something to relate all of here. Now the crazy thing about Sammy Oak is that he is from 40 years in the past, and he is using very primitive technology. You know, he's taking down notes as the early form of the Pokedex, and he has this really crazy looking first draft of a Pokeball. So what it really tells us is even though Pokemon have existed for thousands of years, even though the history of the Pokemon world goes back for so long, that this is a new emerging technology, capturing Pokemon with this more high-tech advanced systems, such as the Pokedex. The Pokedex is a very recent discovery and a very recent technological advancement. It's the reason why we are actually doing our work in the games, that we're out supposed to be collecting Pokemon, that way we can get data on these Pokemon. It's not that these new Pokemon are appearing with every region, it's that we haven't had the opportunity to collect and research them with this new technology known as the Pokedex. So a new generation doesn't mean these new Pokemon just poofed magically into existence. It shows that all of these Pokemon have existed. I mean, look at Claydol. Claydol is from the 3rd generation, but it goes back 20,000 years. Same with Sigilyph, same with all these other Pokemon from ancient times that are in newer generations. It's just because the technology is finally catching up to be able to record these Pokemon. So what does that mean for Mimikyu? Well, that means Mimikyu has existed longer than Porygon. Porygon is at most 20 years old, or something around 20 years old, according to its own Pokedex entry. So that is effectively maybe Game Freak even putting in like a little bit of a no, don't think this, because Mimikyu is older than Porygon. How can Mimikyu exist as the possessed spirit of an enraged Porygon before Porygon even existed? Now also, if we go back to that same blurb, we can interpret it a different way. The rising popularity of Pikachu-styled merchandise around 20 years ago. Remember, this is inside the game. This is inside the Pokemon world, not inside the real life. It's a little bit of like a cheeky little nod to real life, but shows that, you know, Pikachu merchandise just happened to start bubbling up around 20 years ago of this thousands and thousand years of history in the Pokemon world. So that's why Mimikyu made itself look like Pikachu. Notice this past tense. It would be able to make friends with humans if only it looked like Pikachu. It's the reason that Mimikyu makes itself look like Pikachu. So before 20 years ago, Mimikyu was just some kind of random ghost that just kind of wandered around. Maybe it just kind of had like a normal generic Halloween ghosty kind of costume. Or maybe it didn't even put work into it. That just decided to be this lonely, sad little ghost kind of Pokemon, and that it just used a regular old sheet. But because of the merchandise that just happened to blow up around 20 years ago, that's when it decided that it wanted to become like Pikachu. Or maybe that's where the hatred started to bloom. And that's why I want to break this up into 2 parts, because I feel before we start looking at what Mimikyu is, we need to address what it isn't. It is not Porygon. It's not something that could have existed after Mimikyu either. That there's a lot of weird things around Mimikyu, so I really wanted to hammer this down, that way I didn't make any mistakes in the next part. But this is pretty complex right now. So now we get to figure out who is Mimikyu, what is the identity of the Pokemon under the Pikachu costume, but that'll be next time. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. Now this was actually a really crazy video. Hope you guys enjoyed it a lot. If you did, please leave a like, please consider subscribing, because I was just going to end this video at the Pokedex entry like, yo, how can Porygon even die? How can it possess something because it's not even alive? You know, I was going to end the video right there, but then I saw that 20-year Pokedex entry, and that made me dive even deeper to kind of make you guys realize it's easy to take for granted that the Pokemon world exists as the Pokemon world, that it's its own timeline, it's its own history, and with the way that the games and real life kind of merge together, you can get lost in that fact right there. That really is what starts to debunk this whole Porygon thing, so that's some really fun stuff to consider right there, and I think that's it. So guys, really enjoyed this video, really hope you enjoyed everything that I tried to go through to really push for Mimikyu right here. I hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.